When we think about human relationships, one of the most powerful truths is that real connection never comes from pushing, demanding, or forcing. It grows in the same way a flower blooms, not because someone yanked its petals open, but because the right environment of safety and care allowed it to unfold naturally. When you are dealing with someone who is avoidant, or even someone who has been hurt in the past, the instinct to protect themselves runs deep. Their walls are not built because they don't feel anything. Quite the opposite, they feel so much that letting it out terrifies them. In those moments, pressure becomes their greatest enemy. The harder you push, the further they retreat. The more you demand answers, the more they learn to hide. But when you remove pressure, when you allow them the space to come to you on their own terms, something shifts. Safety replaces fear, and doors that seemed sealed shut begin to crack open. Imagine for a moment being in a room where someone is constantly interrogating you, pressing you for answers you are not ready to give. Your body tenses, your mind races, and you look for the quickest escape. That is what emotional pressure feels like to someone who is avoidant. Now imagine instead being in a room where someone smiles, lets you breathe, and says, "Take your time. I'm here whenever you're ready." Suddenly the tension drops. You may not open up immediately, but the simple knowledge that you are not under attack makes you want to stay in that room. That is the difference between force and safety. Pressure suffocates, safety invites. What most people don't realize is that real intimacy is not about control, but about freedom. When you allow someone to be who they are without trying to bend them to your will, you create an environment where trust can grow. The avoidant person, who has spent years learning to protect themselves, slowly discovers that they are not being chased or cornered, and that realization is what makes them curious enough to come closer. It is not about lowering your standards or silencing your needs. It is about shifting the focus from demanding connection to allowing it to form naturally. This is where patience becomes your most powerful tool. Think of it like taming a wild animal. If you run after it, it bolts. If you stand still, calm and consistent, eventually it approaches on its own. The same principle applies to human connection. Every time you choose to be steady instead of pushy, patient instead of demanding, you are teaching the other person that your presence equals peace. And peace is something no one runs away from. Over time, this lack of pressure becomes the very reason they begin to lean in. They start to trust that their voice will be heard, that their silence won't be punished, and that their feelings won't be used against them. At its core, connection is about choice. You cannot force someone to let you in. You can only create the conditions where letting you in feels safe. That means showing them that love is not a trap, that care is not control, and that presence does not equal pressure. When you embody that kind of calm strength, you stop chasing walls and instead become the open field beyond them. And slowly, one step at a time, the avoidant heart learns that it is safe to step out into that field. Safety, not force, opens doors. And once those doors are opened by choice, they stay open far longer than anything pried open by demand. When you're dealing with someone who has an avoidant nature, one of the greatest mistakes you can make is to constantly demand closeness or clarity from them. The more you press with questions like, "Why didn't you reply?" or "What do you feel about us?" the more they retreat behind the wall they've spent years building. Avoidants don't necessarily withdraw because they don't care. They withdraw because demands feel unsafe, like pressure, like the possibility of being trapped. What actually works is something far more subtle yet deeply powerful, sharing experiences instead of making demands. A small, gentle reminder of a moment you both lived together can open a door that 100 direct questions could never touch. Think of it this way: when you say to someone, "I miss you, why don't you ever talk to me?" you are pointing at the void, at what's missing, at the space between you. An avoidant interprets that as an expectation they are failing to meet. But when you say, "I just walked by that little coffee shop we went to, made me laugh remembering how you teased me about ordering 3 sugars," you're not pointing at absence, you're pointing at presence, you're reminding them of something safe, real, and shared. In that moment, their brain is no longer on guard, preparing to defend itself. Instead, it softens because you've reminded them of connection without asking them to prove or define it. Memories are powerful precisely because they carry emotion without direct confrontation. They take both of you back to a moment when the wall wasn't up, when connection flowed naturally. For an avoidant who often feels overwhelmed by the idea of constant closeness, memories feel manageable. They're moments frozen in time, safe to revisit without the demand of deciding the future or exposing raw feelings. When you share experiences in this way, you're telling them, we'll have something real. I treasure it, and I can enjoy it without pressuring you. That message is magnetic because it communicates stability. This strategy also mirrors how avoidants themselves often express care. They may not always say, I love you, in the way you expect, but they'll reference something you did together or bring up a small inside joke as their way of reaching out. By sharing experiences with them, you're speaking their language, the language of connection through moments, not demands. And in speaking their language, you show them that intimacy doesn't always have to mean interrogation or loss of independence. It can mean laughing about that road trip playlist or remembering how nervous you both were meeting each other's friends for the first time. The key is subtlety. You're not forcing them into a vulnerable exchange. You're extending a bridge. Each time you share an experience, you're saying, we have a story together, and stories feel safe because they're already written, already lived. That's the beauty of it. They can relax in the memory without worrying about what's expected next. Over time, these small reminders accumulate. They create a rhythm of comfort, a sense of familiarity, and slowly the avoidant begins to lower their guard. They start to feel, perhaps without even realizing it, that being close to you doesn't mean suffocation. It means ease. It means laughter. It means the kind of connection that doesn't demand, but simply exists. And that is how memories create comfort without confrontation. They slip past the defenses, they soften the tension, and they prove gently and consistently that connection can be safe. In a world where avoidants fear being consumed by expectation, your gift is to show them that closeness can live in small shared moments, remembered and relived without the need for pressure. That's when the walls start to come down. When you're trying to connect with someone who has avoidant tendencies, the natural instinct might be to push harder, to ask direct questions like, why don't you open up to me? Or what are you feeling right now? But for someone who is wired to retreat when emotions feel heavy, those kinds of demands are like alarms. They trigger the very walls you're hoping to break down. That's why it's far more powerful to shift the energy away from pressure and towards shared experiences. When you tell an avoidant, I need you to talk to me, their defense system goes up. But when you say, this made me think of you, or this reminded me of when we laughed about that thing last week, you're no longer standing at their wall banging on the door. You're gently placing something in front of them that feels light, familiar, and safe. Think about it like this: avoidants often equate intimacy with danger. Maybe they grew up in a home where emotions were overwhelming, or maybe their past taught them that closeness leads to disappointment. So when they sense someone pulling them into emotional territory, they pull away as an act of self-protection. By sharing experiences rather than demanding answers, you're showing them that connection can exist in moments of lightness, not just in heavy conversations. A simple photo, a memory, or a callback to something funny you experienced together communicates, we already have a bond and I enjoy it. It bypasses their fear response because it doesn't ask them to give you something on demand. Instead, it offers something they can receive freely. Memories are especially powerful because they activate a sense of familiarity. When you bring up a shared moment, you remind them that the two of you already have a history of comfort and safety. Imagine texting, I just passed by that pizza place where we laughed about the waiter mixing up our order. That doesn't ask for a confession of love or an emotional unpacking of the day. It simply sparks a smile and places them back in a moment where their guard wasn't up. In that way, memories act as bridges that lead them back toward you without feeling like they're being dragged. This method gently rewires their nervous system to associate you with ease instead of pressure. Another reason this works is because avoidants often want connection just as much as anyone else. but they're terrified of the vulnerability it requires. By anchoring communication in shared experiences, you remove the fear of exposure. They're not being asked to hand you their diary. They're being invited into a story you both already know. This makes engagement low risk, and over time, those low risk engagements pile up into a sense of trust. They begin to think, this person doesn't demand me to be different. They simply enjoy being with me. That thought alone begins to loosen the armor they wear. What's truly beautiful about this approach is that it teaches them intimacy doesn't have to equal confrontation. Many avoidants believe closeness always comes with expectations, judgment, or demands. When you share experiences instead of issuing demands, you're rewriting that script. You're saying, we can connect without pressure. We can enjoy each other without fear. And in that safety, they start to reveal more. It may not happen instantly, but each small moment builds trust. Over time, they begin to see that with you, walls aren't necessary. Instead of being cornered, they feel chosen. Instead of being judged, they feel remembered. That is when they finally open up. When you're trying to connect with someone who leans avoidant, it's important to remember that direct demands for closeness often feel like a spotlight to them, a spotlight that makes them want to retreat further into the shadows. The more you push, the more they back away, not necessarily because they don't value you, but because intimacy feels risky and overwhelming. That's why one of the most powerful ways to gently open that door is to share experiences instead of issuing demands. When you bring up something that connects the two of you without pressuring them to respond in a certain way, you create an environment where intimacy feels natural, not forced. Think about the difference between texting, "Why don't you ever tell me how you feel?" and sending, "I just walked past that coffee shop we went to last month. It reminded me of how you made me laugh about the barista's handwriting." One feels like an interrogation. The other feels like an invitation to remember a moment together. Shared experiences are powerful because they root your connection in something real, something both of you are part of. They bypass the defenses that get triggered when you try to pull an avoidant into a conversation about emotions directly. Instead of putting them on the spot, you're placing a small memory on the table, almost like a pebble in a river. It's light, it's easy, it doesn't demand a reaction, but it sends a ripple that reminds them of closeness. Over time, these little reminders start to soften the association they have between relationships and suffocation. They begin to realize that closeness can be playful, safe, and even enjoyable. Another important element here is that shared experiences spark familiarity. Familiarity in psychology is one of the biggest builders of trust. Avoidants often feel like people want too much from them too quickly, which makes them tighten their boundaries. But when you bring up a memory, a meal you enjoyed, a joke you both laughed at, a song you heard together, you're reinforcing the message, we already have a bond. It's not something you need to create under pressure. This reassurance lowers their guard because it reminds them they don't have to perform or prove anything to you. The bond already exists. It's not about prying a door open. It's about gently showing them that the door is already unlocked. Sharing experiences also changes the emotional tone of your communication. Demands tend to carry weight. They imply urgency, dissatisfaction, and a need that must be filled. This can easily make someone avoidant feel like they're failing, and failure is terrifying to someone who already fears intimacy. But memories carry lightness. They carry a sense of togetherness without obligation. They turn the focus away from what isn't happening right now, like the lack of emotional disclosure, and instead celebrate something that already did happen. That positive reinforcement encourages more of the same. It tells the avoidant, I see you, I enjoy you, and I remember the good in us. That message is far more effective at drawing them closer than any amount of questioning or complaint. Ultimately, when you share experiences instead of demands, you're building intimacy by association. You're proving, without saying it outright, that connection with you doesn't equal pressure, it equals warmth. Over time, this consistent reminder rewires the way they experience closeness. They stop bracing themselves for conflict and start associating your presence with comfort. And that's the moment when walls begin to crack, not because you pushed them down, but because you built something strong enough to be let in. When someone has an avoidant attachment style, their walls are not built out of arrogance or indifference. They are built out of fear. Fear of being hurt, fear of being rejected, fear of letting someone in only to watch them leave. That fear hardens into a kind of armor, and the person hides behind it to protect themselves. But here's the truth, even behind that armor, there is still a longing to be seen, valued, and loved. That's where appreciation comes in. Appreciation is not flattery or manipulation, it's a genuine acknowledgement of someone's worth. And when it is expressed in the right way, it has the power to soften even the strongest defenses. Think about what happens when you show appreciation to someone who is constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. They expect criticism, distance, or demands because that is what their defenses are trained to anticipate. Instead, when you offer a simple recognition, "I love how thoughtful you are," or "I really enjoyed that story you shared with me," you interrupt that cycle. Suddenly, they are confronted with kindness they didn't have to earn, recognition they didn't have to beg for, and value that isn't conditional on perfect behavior. That moment of unexpected appreciation cuts through fear because fear cannot coexist with genuine gratitude. When you recognize someone, you're telling them, "I see you." And for avoidants, being seen without judgment is rare. Many times in their lives, closeness has been paired with criticism or control, so they withdraw. But appreciation flips that equation. Instead of closeness being dangerous, closeness becomes rewarding. A small text that says, "Talking with you always makes my day better," or "You really make me laugh," might seem insignificant, but for an avoidant it carries weight. It tells them they can let their guard down and still be valued. Recognition becomes an antidote to rejection. It's important to understand that appreciation is not about overloading them with praise or trying to force intimacy through grand declarations. That can feel overwhelming, and for someone avoidant, too much intensity feels like a trap. Instead, appreciation works best in small, steady doses. Genuine, specific acknowledgements that reflect who they are and how they show up. For example, instead of a vague, "You're great," something like, "I really like how you listen, it makes me feel heard," creates a sense of personal connection. It's authentic, and authenticity is what builds trust. Trust is the bridge between fear and love. When someone is avoidant, they do not trust that being vulnerable will be safe. But every time you show recognition without expectation, you lay another brick on that bridge. Over time, those bricks form something strong enough for them to walk across. They begin to believe, even if quietly at first, that opening up will not lead to abandonment. Appreciation helps them rewire the connection between closeness and danger, replacing it with closeness and reward. The beauty of appreciation is that it doesn't just benefit the avoidant partner, it transforms the dynamic for you as well. When you practice seeing and acknowledging the good in someone, you shift your own focus away from frustration and towards connection. You stop waiting for them to magically change, and instead, you help create the conditions where change feels possible. Recognition builds trust where fear once lived, but it also builds patience and compassion in the one offering it. In that space, both people grow, and slowly, the wall that once seemed unbreakable becomes something they no longer need. Consistency is often underestimated, yet it is the quiet force that transforms relationships, especially when dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. Avoidants are not cold or incapable of love, but they have learned, often from childhood experiences, that closeness comes with risk. They fear being consumed, judged, or hurt if they let their guard down. This fear creates patterns of withdrawal, silence, and distance. The natural instinct of most people on the receiving end is to push harder, to demand answers, or to chase. Unfortunately, that only deepens the avoidance instinct to retreat. The antidote is not to overwhelm them with intensity, but to offer a steady rhythm of presence. This is where consistency becomes the most powerful tool. When you show up in the same calm, reliable way time after time, you begin to rewrite the script in their mind. Imagine someone who has always braced themselves for the other shoe to drop, who assumes affection will turn into control or rejection. Now, they see you respond with patience when they take a step back. They see you maintain warmth instead of punishment when they need space. Over time, this breaks through the deep-seated fear that intimacy equals danger. It sends the quiet but potent message, "Oh, I am here. I do not disappear when things are uncomfortable, and I do not punish you for being human. This is not something that happens in a single conversation or through one perfectly written text. It happens in the repeated experience of your steadiness, like water carving its way through stone. Consistency does not mean suppressing your own needs or walking on eggshells. It does not mean waiting endlessly for crumbs of attention. It means that within the boundaries of what you know you deserve, you choose steadiness over reactivity. If they withdraw for a day, you resist the temptation to spiral into accusations. Instead, you gently reaffirm your presence. If they return, you don't weaponize their absence with sarcasm or guilt. You allow the connection to breathe, to recover, and to grow stronger. This balance of patience and self-respect is what makes consistency sustainable. You are not erasing yourself to keep them comfortable. You are showing them a version of love that is reliable, respectful, and unwavering without being suffocating. Over time, this pattern builds trust in a way that words cannot. An avoidant partner or friend begins to see that intimacy does not always end in disaster. They learn through experience that they can step closer without being trapped, and they can retreat without losing your care entirely. Their nervous system, which once associated closeness with danger, begins to relax in your presence. That relaxation is the first step to true openness. What was once a wall begins to soften, not because you broke it down, but because you created a safe environment where it no longer needed to stand so tall. Patience is not glamorous. It doesn't give the rush of a big declaration or the satisfaction of an immediate breakthrough. But when dealing with avoidance, patience is the love language that speaks the loudest. Each small act of steadiness, each time you choose understanding over panic, reassurance over accusation becomes a thread in a larger fabric of security, and eventually that fabric becomes something they trust enough to wrap themselves in. That is when you see them start to share more openly, not because you demanded it, but because they finally believe it's safe to do so.